evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session of Jijnasa on the rise of China and what it means for India and Asia. We have the privilege of having Sir Ramananda Sengupta speak to us on this topic. May I please welcome him on the stage? I would also welcome Professor Krishna Bhatta to join us on the stage. Let me start by giving a brief introduction about Sengupta. He started his career as a journalist 25 years ago with the Telegraph in Calcutta, where he became the newspaper's first foreign editor. He then went on to head the international desk of Outlook magazine in New Delhi, Rediff in Mumbai, and its publications in India and abroad both, before moving to Chennai as editor of Sify.com. 4 years later, he returned to Mumbai to join a startup, India.com, as editor-in-chief, and then to Bangalore in January this year as an editor-in-chief of yet another startup, iStream.com. He is now a consultant editor with Indian Defence Review, a premier strategic affairs magazine, and writes for various think tanks like the Al Jazeera Center for Studies, amongst others. His abiding personal and professional interest, however, has always been India and its place in the region and in the world. We could not have hoped for a better speaker on the topic of India and China, and we are privileged that he is here with us here in Bangalore. Before I hand over the stage to him, a quick introduction about Professor Krishna Bhatta. Although he doesn't need one, he is being the guiding line for Jijnasa, a platform that aims to bring to fore the contemporary issues faced by India. It's an effort to build out an alternate narrative on the issues that are facing the country today. He's been the former national president of the ABVP and is very actively involved in nurturing youth of this country. With that introductory remark, may I welcome Mr. Sengupta to take over the stage, please.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. Just a little closer.
Just adjust the mic. No, pull it up.
Is it Chinese mic?
The neck.
Okay. Let me begin with a confession. I am not a China expert. I'm sure there are people here in the audience who have forgotten more about China than I would ever learn. Having said that, as an individual and as a journalist, I've always been fascinated by this giant neighbor of ours. I remember my father talking in very hushed tones about Sikh deserters from the 1962 war who came into Calcutta, where they would talk in fearful tones about giant 9 feet tall Chinese soldiers immune to Indian bullets coming down in hordes from the hills of the northeast. It's been 50 years since then. All of us know that it's 50 years since that 1962 war. But this is officially also the year of India-China friendship and cooperation. The world has changed a lot in the last 50 years. We've seen dramatic changes, political, social. But I would still like to argue that in these 50 years, we have not given China the attention it deserves. Yes, every year we fight that battle around this time in our media. Every year we keep asking ourselves, would it happen again? We learned our lesson. But on a deeper level, I think we have not invested in learning about China, about its culture, about the way they think, about its strategic policies and philosophies, about what makes the country tick. Let me give you an example. The first time I went to China officially was with President Narayan in April 2000. We were part of the media delegation. We went to Beijing in those 9 days. We went to Dalian in the northeast, where incidentally the mayor at the time was a gentleman called Ho Zilai, who went on to become the commerce minister and has recently been kicked out of the party because his wife. And from there we went to Kunming, southwest, where in 2007 we held the first Indo-China joint military exercises. In Beijing, some of us interacted with a lot of Chinese scholars and people with interest in India. In one of the introductory remarks, one of the professors there said that while China is very keen to learn about India, fascinated with India, India does not seem to share that same interest about China. And he backed it up by pointing to the fact that there was only one solitary Indian journalist covering the entire length and breadth of China, and this was PTI. Whereas there were about a dozen Chinese journalists in India at that time. The young colleague of mine sitting next to me muttered in Hindi, "Sab ke sab jasoos honge." Without missing a beat, the professor who was talking to us responded in Hindi, saying that that may be so, but that only goes on to prove my point. It later turned out that all the people we were interacting with were fluent in Sanskrit and at least one more Indian language. In a fascinating talk in Delhi earlier this year, former Foreign Secretary and eminent diplomat, Ambassador Shyam Saran, said that part of this disconnect was due to the fact that China had a visual culture. The Chinese language has no alphabet. Each character is a word in itself. And a decent vocabulary required memorizing at least 3,000 characters. Scholars can aspire to learn 5,000. Could I get slide 2 or 3? The next one. Yeah, this one. Each of these is a word by itself. Some of these words are acquired nuances which are totally alien to an outsider. According to Ambassador Saran, even to this day, much of Chinese discourse is conducted through historical analogies, some of which are explicit and well known. Some are artfully coded, and the language lends itself easily to innuendo and ambiguity. India, on the other hand, has an oral culture, where history is handed down orally first, then put on manuscript. We have our slokas, which are handed down orally. This difference in civilizational trajectory has its impact on how our two cultures perceive the world around us and interact with one another. The other important point Ambassador Saran made was that deception is an integral part of Chinese strategic culture. There is no moral or ethical dimension attached to deception. And the Chinese would find it odd if you were to accuse them of betrayal, in particular if the strategy of deception actually worked. None of us here wants to lose face. But when you talk of losing face in China, it has a whole new meaning altogether, or at least it does for the older generation. I think the younger generation perhaps doesn't have that same resonance. 10 years ago, I was doing a series for my for Readership where I used to work, on 40 years post the 62 war. And I was very keen that we have a Chinese perspective on it. So I asked a few people, a few scholars, some bureaucrats to write on it for us. One of them, after agreeing, cancelled at the last minute saying that he was the head of a think tank there, cancelled at the last minute saying that he had a seminar to attend in Singapore. I wrote back saying that while I understood his compulsions, I would lose space with my editor because I had promised him that. An hour later, the professor's secretary called me up to say that I could expect the piece late in the evening because the professor had cancelled his flight for the seminar because he did not want me to lose space. And this is somebody whom I don't even know. Another former foreign secretary and our second NSA, Mr. J.N. Dixit, whom I in many ways consider a mentor in my understanding of the international world, once had a meeting with the Chinese executive vice foreign minister and special representative on the border issue, Mr. Dai Guo. After that talk, I remember Mr. Dixit telling me in a very exasperated manner that I think these guys have done their homework. Why can't we? But that's easier said than done. How indeed does one deal with, let's say, classic Chinese game of maps? I want Taiwan. Let me claim the entire Arunachal Pradesh. I want a few islands in the South China Seas. Let me claim the entire sea. And then negotiate backwards, all the time making it seem like I am the one making a concession. In fact, the Chinese have actually done that with the map called the 9-9 map. That happened next slide. If you notice, they have marked this entire region as their own. Of course, another reason why we struggle to sort of understand China is the lack of information that comes out of that country. Despite the advent of the internet, which has started opening up certain sectors, China still mostly remains a closed, insular society. And the world mostly hears what the government wants us to hear. And even then, you have to be very sure that you've understood the subtext, very sure that you understand what's going on between the lines. Speaking of lines, however, there is no ambiguity whatsoever about the clear red lines that China has drawn on what it describes as its core non-negotiable issues. These include Taiwan, Tibet, Xinjiang, and perhaps part of the South China Seas. These are territorial and sovereign issues for which China is willing to go to war. And the Chinese insecurity over this is obvious from the repeated assurances they seek from every world capital that we believe in the one China policy. It also has disputes over various island chains in the South China Seas, with Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and of course Japan. The extension of maritime boundaries, fishing rights, mining rights further compound these disputes. Anti-Japanese riots erupted across China once again sometime last month. After Japan purchased 2 or 3 islands in the East China Sea called Senkaku in Japan and Dayu in China from their private owner, violent mobs attacked Japanese interests across China. Supermarkets, factories, car dealerships, while the authorities stood around and watched. So far, Japan estimates losses of more than $100 million. Things calmed down somewhat after the Americans categorically made clear that the islands were covered under the US-Japan Mutual Cooperation and Security Treaty. However, as a concession, Japan cancelled a joint military drill with the US that was supposed to have taken place sometime last week. Part of the drill would have simulated the recapture of a remote Japanese island from a foreign invader. Under the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, the United States provides Taiwan arms of a defensive character and pledges to maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security of the social or economic system of the people of Taiwan. Given that Taiwan is on China's list of core non-negotiable issues, there is obviously a lot of room for misunderstandings and conflict. America's Asia pivot, announced last year by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, has added to Chinese concerns. While the State Department stresses that this is a very significant feature of American foreign policy, it also insists that it wants to work with, not against China, and asserts that we, as the China and the United States, recognize that the Asia-Pacific region is big enough for both of us. In response, outgoing Chinese President Hu Jintao stressed on the need for a more powerful Chinese Navy. The Americans are actually walking a bit of a tightrope here. If they actually get down to using force, they buttress the Chinese assumption that they're trying to contain or keep China within the region. If they don't use it, then it is seen as a sign of weakness, and there is a fear that many of the nations in that area would then start moving towards the Chinese sphere of influence. But that Beijing is very unlikely to soften its stand on the row with Tokyo. It appears to be cautious about directly challenging Washington on security issues so far. The American policy on China so far seems to be engage and challenge. The thinking behind that seems to be that if we can get China involved in a host of international fields, financial, social, economic, then it becomes that much more difficult for China to act against those institutions. As far as challenges go, you have human rights, you have trade and commerce, and increasing access to China's market. The Chinese, however, at least many of whom that I've talked to, believe that the existing international systems are part of the thin edge of the democratic wedge. That is not something they're comfortable with. We have the next slide. But is a rising China a threat? This is the islands which we're fighting over now. How do we define a threat? A threat is usually defined as a combination of hostile intentions and credible capabilities. However, a very tangible skill dilemma kicks in. Because even when a nation enhances its military capability in a defensive mode, that we're looking ahead 10 years down the line, we need to be prepared for a possible conflict, their neighbors see it as an offensive move. In other words, regardless of intentions, capabilities are a threat. No one doubts China's increasing economic might, and bar some major crisis, it is expected to become the world's largest economy in the next 2 decades or so. It is also a nuclear weapon state, and it is allocating huge budgets for its military. May we have the next slide, please? Next one. This is the latest figures in terms of how much we're spending on military forces. A couple of years ago in Jakarta, the editors conference, conference, I met a young Chinese scholar. We got along well, and in the evening, over a couple of drinks, we were discussing Indo-China relations. After reasserting that China would consider a war or the use of force only if its core interests were threatened, he went on to argue that conventional warfare, where you go in and occupy enemy territory, hold it, perhaps even administer it, has become increasingly redundant. He gave me a long talk on asymmetrical warfare and admitted that China believed that the United States would continue to remain the sole superpower for at least the next 10 years. When he left, the question he asked me was, have you seen Die Hard 4? Now, that is a movie where some criminals break into the US power grid and cause immense chaos, starting from capitalized Wall Street. Last month, next slide please. The US House of Representatives Intelligence Committee warned that equipment made by Huawei and ZTE, two Chinese electronics giants, posed a risk because it could be used to eavesdrop on America's telecom networks. The report also warned that China's persistent attempts and advances in hacking activities pose a growing threat not just to information systems worldwide, but could disrupt or blind American satellites, weapons training systems, and navigation companies. Back in India at National Seminar on Technological Sovereignty, ICT in Delhi recently, General Dhruv Katoch, the additional director of the Center for Land Warfare Studies, grimly noted that 60 to 75% of the telecom software used in India is from Huawei and ZTE. Let's stay on India for a while. How does a rising China impact us? Does it really pose a threat? If you go back to the definition of a threat, capabilities are threats. Hostile intentions are subjective. As rapidly growing economies, both India and China are competing for the same things. Power sources, soil and natural gas, minerals, and of course goodwill and influence. This is not limited to the region, but extends all the way to Africa, the Persian Gulf, Central Asia, Latin America. Bilaterally, we have agreed to put contentious issues at the border on the back burner while we build on issues where they converge: trade and commerce, cultural ties. So from a few $1 billion in 2000, bilateral trade between India and China reached a record $73.9 billion last year. But here's the critical point. The imbalance in China's favor is $27 billion. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we export iron ore to China, and because of our mining scams and the restrictions that have been imposed, subsequently, our exports to China have gone down. I guess this difference might not have been that big. We mostly import Chinese machinery, power, and telecom equipment. And by 2015, both sides are quite sure of crossing the $100 billion trade mark. Apart from that, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has met the Chinese president and premier about 20 times over the last 5-6 years. He's met his Chinese counterpart Wen Jiabao about 13 times in the last few years. In China, Mahindra and Mahindra, the Tatas, Infosys, Mahindra Satyam, NIIT have all set up shop. We are even likely to revive our joint military exercises, which were cancelled in 2010 after the Chinese denied a visa for a defense delegation led by our northern area's commander, Lieutenant General B.S. Jaswal. China said it was finding it difficult to give General Jaswal a visa because he administered disputed areas. The next piece. This is the map because of which The Economist was banned in India. They carried this map and that entire edition was sort of banned in India by the government. On the other hand, our strategic analysts point to increasing alarm the Chinese missile bases in Tibet, the rapid infrastructure and even military exercises on the other side of our borders. China's increasing arc of influence in the Indian Ocean region, with friendly ports in Myanmar, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, the Seychelles, Maldives, and stretching all the way to Eastern Africa. China, of course, says that this is not aimed at India, but at buttressing its energy security because all its oil imports come down this route. Our analysts also point to the incredibly strong Chinese ties with Pakistan, which has actually leased parts of Gilgit-Baltistan, the northern area of Kashmir, to China. China has already occupied a part of Gilgit-Baltistan, a little part of Hunza, and the Aksai Chin is also occupied. Says Wahajat Hussain Khan, the chief of the Gilgit-Baltistan National Alliance. On the flip side, the Chinese, while arming Pakistan with missiles and nuclear technology and military hardware, have strenuously avoided getting involved in any wars that they have with Pakistan. That doesn't mean that they won't. But so far, they have not. One crucial factor when we talk about strategic implications that a lot of us seem to miss out on is water. India has watershed treaties with almost every neighbor that we have a river, starting from Pakistan to Nepal to Bhutan to Bangladesh. China, however, asserts that all rivers on Chinese soil belong to them, and that it doesn't see the need for any agreement with anybody else. Almost all our major rivers of the subcontinent, to the next step, come down from the Tibetan mountains. The Indus, the Mahakali, Kosi, the Brahmaputra, which is known as the Sangpo in China. Ignoring protests from neighbors downstream as well as ecologists, China is aggressively building dams in Tibet, capable of not just regulating, but diverting the Brahmaputra's flow according to China's needs. There's one project in eastern Tibet near Mount Namcha, where the Sangpo turns south to enter India. That is expected to be the world's biggest hydroelectric dam, to double the capacity of the three gorges. It will also be diverting water to China's southwest. Another smaller project near Lhasa will also be able to regulate the flow of water into India. India has, however, protested against certain Chinese dam building and waterways activity. In Gilgit-Baltistan, we have something called the Diamer Bhasa Dam, which the Chinese are building in Pakistan, in northern compartments. But it's not just the dam. They're bringing in telecom equipment, they're bringing in a lot of other infrastructure for that region, which is essentially desolate area. In response to Indian objections to such projects, however, the Chinese website said the Indian jealousy coupled with suspicion against China has lately become bigger. Firstly, India adopts precaution against Chinese enterprises by all possible means, and then cooks up story of an intrusion around the border. Whenever China gets in touch with other neighboring countries, it invariably triggers a series of anxiety from India. What is China's beef with us? Do they too perceive us as a threat? One of the things that the Chinese really haven't yet got to know, and I see that in almost every interaction I have with anybody from China, they have not yet gotten around to forgiving us for giving refuge to the Dalai Lama in 1959. The presence of the Tibetan government in exile in Dharamshala is seen as an affront by many of the Chinese. The recent spate of self-immolations by Tibetans across China has added to Chinese concerns. More than 20 such deaths have taken place since November 1, including at least one woman and a 14-year-old boy. The international focus on this has increased China's sensitivity towards anything that smacks of what it describes as splittist tendencies in Tibet. But China's strategic aims are not limited to the region alone. Let me take you to 9 volcanic islands in the North Atlantic Ocean. Halfway between North America and Europe. About 1,500 kilometers from Lisbon and about 2,000 kilometers from Newfoundland. These islands form the autonomous region of the Azores, one of 2 autonomous regions of Portugal. Early in the morning of June 27, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao's Boeing 747 landed at Airbase number 4 on the island of Terceira, that's the island somewhere there, for refueling. Wen was returning to Beijing after a fairly successful trip to Latin America, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile. After a small formal reception, he spent 4 hours on a walkabout on that island. Talking about bullfighting, talking about the European economic crisis, and of course China. Then he asked an old timer there that, what did he think about China? The old timer replied, very mysterious. Then broke out laughing. He said, China's reform and opening up for 30 years. It is no longer a mystery. But what was the premier of an aspiring superpower doing in these remote islands? Simple. Airbase number 4, also known as largest airbase, is jointly operated by Portugal and the United States Air Force. This is an important refueling station for aircraft that can't clear the Atlantic in one jump and played a critical role during the 2 Gulf Wars. Here's what Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China, said in an article titled Red Flag Over the Atlantic. Peace in the North Atlantic and advances in air-to-air refueling have decreased the importance of the strategic runway on this island. US Pentagon budget cutters, according to some observers, are planning to make Largest into a coast base. This will obviously impact the local economy because the base pays for a lot of local supplies and things. If China controlled the base, the Atlantic would no longer be secure. From the 10,865-foot runway on the northeastern edge of the island, Chinese planes could control the northern and central portions of the Atlantic and thereby cut air and sea traffic between US and Europe. Beijing would also be able to deny access to the nearby Mediterranean Sea, and China could target the American homeland. Largest is less than 2,300 miles from New York, shorter than the distance between Pearl Harbor and Los Angeles. The Chinese not only have the capabilities, they're willing to exercise this. The message going out, regardless of whether the Americans vacate or continue to occupy the place, the message going out is very clear. You mess in our backyard, you mess in yours. Compare that with India. Arundhati Ghosh, one of India's finest diplomats, who bluntly told the Americans where to get off when they were forcing us to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, once told me this think we have a sense that we are a more powerful country today. I don't see that. Because I don't think we yet understand power. I don't think we understand power at all. Economically, today we have more power relatively compared to what we had 10 or 20 years ago. But we do not understand it. We do not know how to use it. We do not know how to project it. We are uncomfortable with it. If you have power, you have to be able to use it, to leverage it. But be very clear about what is it you want. Whether you're dealing with Bangladesh or China or Sri Lanka. How is it, she asked? Is that in Sri Lanka, which is so closely intertwined with us because of the Tamil population and just across the straits, how is it that the Norwegians are brokering their history? That was 26 years ago. It's probably true now. Predictions about international affairs at the Marx scale. Over the past 25 years, we've heard about the rise of Russia, the rise of China, the decline of the United States, the rise of India. But that still hazard a guess as to what we can expect over the next decade or so. I would love to be proved wrong, but I suspect that we are going to see China increasingly asserting itself in the region. It is going to keep on pushing the envelope with the United States. And we in India are likely to see a lot of incursions across the line of control and increasing pressure over Arunachal and the Dalai Lama. So, how do we deal with that? Here's what I think we should do, not one after the other, but in parallel. First, we need to invest in intelligence, resources, and deep thought on understanding the Chinese culture, its way of thinking, the influences behind its strategic policies. Second, I think we need to very clearly define and announce our own non-negotiable core interests over which we are willing to go to war. 3, we must push for a water treaty with China before it goes out of hand. 4, we must invest in resources and forces to ramp up our ability all along our border, not just with China, but with Pakistan, with Nepal, Bangladesh. We also need to avoid being promoted as a Western counterweight to China. I see a lot of that going around, that India is being used. I personally resent this notion of India being used by any other nation, but that is something that is doing the rounds in strategic circles. We also need to keep stressing on the Pakistani links to terror in Xinjiang. Here's what I also expect. We are going to see a lot of friction in the South China Seas over the next decade or so. We are going to also see a lot of belligerence from the Chinese side when it comes to our core interests. In today's world, speaking softly while carrying a big stick is not enough. It is important to be able to, not just being able, but being seen as being able to wield that stick when needed. Thank you very much.